love that. Thank you so much, Rita. I just want to indicate that I won't be able to see the chats at the moment. So just raise your hand or chip in if you want to ask anything or if you can't hear me clearly enough. All right. So thank you so much. This is the last session of the last day. So I really appreciate you guys waiting it out to listen to my presentation. And I think it's something that needs some rethinking, right? And I think I just want to start the discussion thinking a little bit about how we think and conduct instructional time in South African schools. And although this is in the schools context, this can really be applied into our institutions at university or any level of education and time spent on learning. So I will just quickly look at what is the problem that I want to discuss. Why do we need to reconceptualize? Why do we need to rethink what do we mean with instructional time? And how can we make teaching and learning great again? All right. So to start off with, if we think of schools today, our learners today, they spend about 7 hours a day in the classroom, obviously with breaks and so, but I mean, we drop them off at school for 7:30 and we pick them up around 2:30, depending on the programs. And they spend those hours there, and we assuming that they are spending their time learning, right? But if, and I'm sure you've done it before, if you ask your child, what have they learned today? The answer mostly is nothing much, blah, 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 not really something that they can really pick out and say, this was something interesting, this is how they were engaged in class, and it was something that they enjoyed. And I think our policies, and I'll get to that now, but our schools need to be compliant to our 27.5 hours per week of instructional time or allocated time, as it's also referred to, and sometimes it's also referred to as teaching time. But even though those hours are set out and the schools are compliant to that, our literacy and numeracy in our results really remains low. Everybody is aware of that. So that can, I mean, we all know that seat time, sitting in class, does not necessarily guarantee student achievement, but it is monitored in that way, right? So students we mark them as attended or not, they are in school or not, they have to sign out if they leave school, and if they haven't been in school for a couple of days or at a certain threshold, they failed a year. But none of that is really relating us to, did they really master what they need to know? You know, why are they failing? Is it because they didn't master it, or is it because they didn't attend or sit in class? So, and if you think about, or if you read about studies around seating time and time in seat, and they have all different kinds of wording that goes with it, 30 to 40% of seat time is not even engaging at all. So that already takes away a couple of the hours there that our students are sitting in the class doing nothing or not being engaged. And can we then say that seat time is a measure of educational quality? And that's really something we need to think about. So if we just look at our South African policies in the context in the context of today, like I said, our South African model defined time as allocated hours. Those are assumed to be the hours that are spent in the classroom, right? And it really doesn't indicate specifics with regards to what does that mean. You know, obviously we assume that it's teaching time or doing some work or whatever, but it doesn't directly relate to learning and mastering and achieving or development of skills in that sense. So when we look at South Africa's approach in general, it is actually quite different from what we see in other parts of the world. And with this, I'm not saying we should follow what they are saying, what the rest of the world are doing, but it is important to just see how other educational institutions or educational programs do approach the time in seat or allocated time differently, and it is different in different contexts. So, for example, in Finland, schools decide to use their time schools decide on how they want to use their time. So in Finland, they have the learner well-being and the teacher autonomy at the center of these decisions. In the UK, for instance, they focus on the intent of the curriculum, how it is implemented and what impact it has. And in the US, there has been, a push away from the traditional idea of seat time, like we know it as well, towards competency-based models. So that's the mastery, checking if the skills have been developed, where students move forward only when they've mastered the work. So although it's different contexts and different, I would almost say, definitions or approaches towards teaching time or allocated time, there is one shared message between all of the contexts that I've highlighted now. It's not just about, the hours that's being clocked. It is about making sure that the time in education really counts. It should be engaging students cognitively, emotionally, and socially. And we have to really think about what it is that matters to us as educators, what is important for us. And I've put this thing together, and I want to start at the end. And I think we all share in some way or another that we really want to have our students to achieve. We want to have qualified students, qualified graduates, and not just saying that, yes, I have the paper passing with a 30%. We want them to be quality type students, so quality qualified students. And with that, we can't just ignore the fact that learning must be effective, right? So if we move then one step back, to get this student achievement, this quality student achievement, we have to look at effective instructional time. What is happening when we are saying we are allocating teaching time, or when the students are spending time in the classroom, whether it's online or offline or at home, spending time with educational material with the aim to learn something. And then effective instructional time can only happen if there is active learning that is occurring. So effective instructional time relates with active learning. Otherwise, it is not effective, right? If there's no active learning happening, we can't say our instructional time is effective. But how do we get active learning happens? And this is based on actively engaged students. Okay, so this is quite a lot, and it's a chain of reactions. But if you have actively engaged students, there will be active learning happening. There will be effective instructional time, and inevitably there will be quality student achievement happening. So I've looked at different theoretical foundations that supports this view and this start of a discussion. And I won't say it's a recipe. It's definitely not a recipe, but it's something and a way in which we can think about how to approach our instructional time that we are spending and forcing our students to do. And one of the theories, and I will discuss all of these one by one as we go through, but Coe has an engagement theory that very nicely resonates with the engagement with regards to learning. And then Vygotsky's zone of proximal development, scaffolding regarding that, where we want our students to be, in what space do they need to be to learn, to have that active learning happening. And then the ICAP framework, where we look at the depth of cognitive engagement. And so with Coe's engagement theory, he is looking at 4 different engagement domains. All right, so don't stress too much about the details. Now I'll talk about that as well a little bit later. And he's talking about a behavioral domain where the students are doing, what are they doing? And these domains are 4 different domains, and you will see there are similar activities included in all of these domains, and I'll talk to that just now. But the whole theory behind this is, if you have one domain available in your content or in your class or in your teaching approach, it's great. But if you have another, so 2 out of the 4, engagement improves. And if you think about the chain reaction that I have there on the previous slide, if your engagement improves, your active learning improves, and inevitably achievement increases, right? So the more domains you can cover in your teaching approach and in the ways that you set up your courses, the better the chance is that the students will engage, and the better the chance is that they will become actively involved and active learning will occur. So the second domain is emotional, the way they feel or they feel they belong. So it's a community or discussion forums, and I'll talk about the activities now, don't stress about it. And then the cognitive is the thinking. How do you engage them with regards to thinking on a deeper cognitive level, and then also on a social level, another domain for communicating. How do you engage them there? And you will see, for instance, there's a discussion forum under the emotional domain, but also under the cognitive domain. So it's very important to understand it's not just to tick the box to say, yes, I have a discussion forum, right, in my course, or I did a discussion in my class. The goals for each of these are quite different. So it's really important to understand why you are placing a discussion forum in your course. Is it just to say you have a discussion forum, or do you actually have a goal? Are you engaging the students cognitively, or are you engaging them emotionally or socially? So it's really important to think about your teaching. The second theory is the Vygotsky social cultural theory. And I think a lot of the education people know about how this works. So in the middle circle, it is what the students can do on their own, right? So they're very comfortable with the tasks. Low order tasks doesn't really need a lot of input from the students. They can do it automatically. And then the next level is the students where they can learn the most, right? This is the space where they can learn, but they need a little bit of help. So this is where we want our students to be. They still need to be able to build on what they know, but learn new things, and then inevitably move towards beyond their reach, so to move to outside of their comfort zones, right? So in this space here, obviously technology and tools and different approaches can really help, but this is the space where you want your students to be. You don't want to just give them keep them in the comfort zone. You want them to be struggling with some work, but with help they can still make it. All right, so that is where active learning is actually happening. And then the ICAP framework. So the ICAP framework is based on cognitive engagement, and it actually reads from the right to the left. So the interactive part is where the students are highly cognitively engaged, and it goes all the way down to passive, where they just sit in the classroom and do nothing, maybe listening to what the teacher is saying in front, but not really taking anything in. So if we think about these three theoretical frameworks, it really supports the flow of discussion that I have put together here, right? So if you have actively engaged students, provide them with more than one way to be actively engaged. Obviously, the chances are that they will be more actively engaged because there are opportunities for them to do so in a way that they feel comfortable. In that space, you can challenge them and activate their learning, promoting active learning, and this will lead to effective instructional time, time spent in the lesson, on the course, in your classroom, and inevitably to student achievement. And it sounds really easy. I know it's not easy. That is definitely not what I'm saying. But if we start thinking about this, and we start thinking about discussions, and if we start thinking about one little thing, and I'll show you guys now just an example, and make changes with small steps, this can really become something that pushes our quality of students to a high level. So what we want to say is instructional time should be characterized with the student being engaged in activities or in schoolwork that promotes active learning. And this should be regardless of modality, right? So this should not say, okay, but they are in class, so they are ticked off as being actively engaged. That doesn't mean that. And or the student are online, I can see the student is online, so that means they are actively engaged. This is very important, and it's very difficult to measure this, and I'll talk to that a little bit as well in my presentation. But I think just with regards to modality, I just quickly want to stop there and just discuss or clarify with regards to modalities, and this will take us into a little bit more of the how are we able, or how can we start to think about making our instructional time more effective or more engaging and improving active learning. So when we think of modes of teaching and learning, we have heard about the synchronous and the asynchronous, and I think there's a myth or a misconception that goes around that synchronous is offline, like in class, face-to-face, and asynchronous is online. And that is not true. You can do synchronous online and offline, and you can do asynchronous online and offline. So this really makes, it makes a new layer of how you can present your course, how you can engage your students. Sometimes discussion forums are easier when you type it in an online space. Sometimes it's easier when you use breakout rooms and have an online discussion in smaller groups. Sometimes it's easier to have it in class. So it's really and I think there's a almost like a misconception that you either have to teach offline, like in class, do a face-to-face thing and only cater for that, or that you have to do it online and then everything is online and you can't have and it's really important to understand that that is really two different teaching approaches, and it covers different ways in which you can teach and reach students and include students. And the best of both worlds is to bring them together and mix and match. So do some classes, obviously design your course as an online course that can support the student, but enhance that with face-to-face meetings and blend it into to really support your students in a way that it can work and make engagement possible. It does provide students with more opportunity to engage in different ways, and that is where we want to be. So I've just listed here a couple of examples, and this can be used as reference, just like the next few slides is reference to how we can do this, right? So I'm sure the slides will be shared as well, so I don't want to go into too much detail here as well. So with the engagement domains, I've listed a couple of activities there, and we have already spoken about discussion forums or any other activity. And I don't say you have to include all of these. These are just examples. And like Amanda also said, she was just looking at the gamification of education. So that's one aspect you can bring in, and it's very complex just by looking at one. So even if you choose just one aspect, let's say you choose discussion forums, see how you can improve that, even just in one unit or even just in one lesson. It doesn't have to mean, the resistance that there usually is with regards to this is usually there is a lot of work. Okay, and I do agree, it is a lot of work if you have to set it up from the beginning and you have to do your whole course from scratch to end, make it engaging, all of that. But choose one topic or one subtopic that you feel very comfortable with and try one of these things to start building your confidence in doing blended learning and trying something new, making your time that the students spend on your course in your class with you much more engaging and promoting active learning. So that was the engagement, the engagement domains. And then here I've just for reference sake listed the activities and then the engagement domains that it relates to. This is just for reference sake if you want to use that for later on. And here I have listed the ICAP levels of cognitive engagement, from a very low engagement where they just watch a recorded lecture, listening to a podcast, or reading a chapter in the book, or attending a lecture without note-taking, all the way up to peer teaching in small groups, co-creating and being really involved in their learning and in their education. So this is just for reference if you would like to use it later on. And like I said, it's not the be all and end all. It's not a recipe. It's just a way to start the conversation. So if we think a little bit about policy implications, obviously, like I mentioned earlier, is that the engagement-based metrics. So how do we measure what we're saying, right? We say, okay, yeah, the student is now more engaged. How do we measure that? So sometimes the online LMSs have really great reporting and analytics, so that makes it really easy to see whether the students spend time on a video or on a forum, and it can also gauge with integration of AI gauge if the discussion was really meaningful in a certain level or it wasn't at all, it was just a hi and a bye type of comment. So it can really, the online platforms and the online analytics can really help us with some of these metrics. Whereas in class, you can see the students, you can see whether they are engaged, and they can, for instance, deliver a presentation. And in that way, you can also make sure, but it's not, you cannot really measure it with a value. You can just see that students are. So there's still a lot to do with regards to measuring the engagement and making sure that engagement is really happening. Or how do you prove that engagement happened, except for seeing it in the achievement of the student, right? So, but we want to detect it early. We want to see, for this lesson, the student didn't really engage. What can I do to mitigate that before they get to the end of term or end of semester or end of year exam? So yeah, there's just a few things that I mentioned there, and that we have to move from time as a compliance issue to time for learning or time as learning. And then obviously, I think also like what Amanda mentioned was there will always be some resistance. And I think there are possible ways in which we can mitigate that resistance, in a sense, by getting the teachers buy-in. It is very important to remember that all of us have been trained basically for a face-to-face environment, right? Whether it is in a rural school or in a public school or in a private school, it is for a face-to-face context. And we are trying to teach ourselves and teach our current student teachers to learn about teaching online, integrating the online stuff. So it's really important to get the buy-in of the teachers and their experiences as well to mitigate the resistance, because it is a lot of work if you have to start from scratch and work all your way through to the end of the course. And I really encourage that should not be the approach that you follow. Really just choose something small, one activity on Ulwazi or one activity in your class, and try to, I would almost say, become an expert in that before you move on to the next one. And I don't encourage people to do more than one, but I'm just saying don't overwhelm yourself in trying to feel like this is not ever going to happen for me, so I'm just not going to even to try. So just start, like Amanda said, just do it. So yeah, so there's obviously some capacity building needed, training, and we really need to build agency, and we need to get buy-in from teachers who are in the education sector and who's also trying to do these things. So I love the podcast where they talk about teaching a new implementation of things, and that's really ways in which we need to do this, because if we don't share and we don't build together, there's nothing we can, our learning curve will be very, very slow. And as you know, that the developments are really, really fast. So, but yeah, so in conclusion, I just wanted to tease you a little bit to rethink and redefine instructional time, as it offers an opportunity to align our educational policies with our pedagogical theories and classroom practice. So it's something we can take back to the classroom and try something new. It helps us to open the door to reframing our instructional time to be dynamic, learner-centered, and future-orientated, and not just a measure of hours sitting in the classroom, and rather than active learning happening. So time in seat is not equal to learning, and that's very important to understand. Even though they already measured it to be 30–40% not being engaging, I think more than that in percentage-wise is no learning is happening. So instructional time should be engaged, through active learning And I think it's really time for us to rethink the time, our educational time for equity and deep learning, instead of just taking roll call and ticking the box of, yes, the student was in class. Yeah, so that was a little bit of food for thought, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
So much, Belinda. I think thank you for those practical last thoughts. And like you mentioned, it's a concept that stretches beyond the school setting, very much into higher education. I was thinking so much about our notional hours and how we design with that in mind and what we're doing there. But I really, yeah, valued your call towards shifting the national narrative from time as compliance to time as learning, and what is it that we're going to reconsider and rethink about, uh, and you know, so very often through the 3 days of conversation and dialogue and calls, we wish leadership was in the room more.
Yes,
And one of the other things is perhaps the question to us CLTD is, how do we pass these messages, these valuable messages, to leadership, and continue the conversation together year after. But I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Thank you. Any, Belinda, can we go hand, and then I'm going to ask Ashad if there's anything um, on the chat space and in the Padlet space as well. So
okay.
maybe we'll take this, Ashad, right? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Belinda, my question, I understand mainly about instructional time, but I want to find out, where then does this leave homework? Because there's been many sayings that South African school children are overburdened with homework. And then also looking at one of the countries you mentioned, Finland, and after having personally spent some time in the schooling system there, there's virtually too little no homework, especially for the foundation phase / intermediate phase learners. There's basically no homework. So in this new conceptualization and instructional time for South Africa, where do we leave homework?
Thank you so much for that question. Yes, and excellent that you have some experience with the Finland education system. That is exactly what this is all about, right? So why do we give homework? Why do we give homework in South Africa? We already have the students in class 30 hours a week. And that is what this conversation is all about. So why can some educational systems, being seen as one of the best education systems in the world, not give homework? And I'm not saying it's flawed or not flawed, but it comes down to that they use the time that they have allocated to education appropriately. Active learning is happening, engaging is happening. And it was Finland who started with the personalized education, I think a long way back. But that was before online learning became so prominent, and they did it with, you know, paperwork and all of that. And it really is working. And especially now with our LMS systems and all of the technology that's caught up, this can really become possible again. And it is something that we can look at to be effective in learning. So where the students they spend time, let's say on an online course or even in a classroom, spend time on developing skills rather than to go and being given 1,000 of pages of working to do. They sit with their teacher in class, in the time allocated with their teacher, and they develop that skill on time, in time, and in the time that has been provided to them in class. So I'm not going to say we shouldn't do homework, we should have homework, but I'm just saying that it really boils down to, what are you using the time in the class for? Are you using it for active learning? And why is homework then needed afterwards if you didn't achieve those development of those skills? So it is something that we need to rethink. Thank you for the question. I hope I answered a little bit.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Belinda. I think that is a valuable question that extends to us as well. What does independent study look like at the university, and why we're not covering everything within the active time we should be engaging with during the contact time of the notional hours? What are we leaving for expanded work that becomes most valuable in the assessment as well?
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of reflection on us while we're looking at the school structuring of time. But any other thoughts, comments, or questions from the floor before I move to Arshad? While you think about that, Arshad?
So we have one question in the Padlet from Natasha on the issue of time. She's asking if we know what we're doing can be improved and will impact student learning and success positively. Shouldn't we make the time to improve rather than continuing old practices? If we don't, aren't we robbing our students of the best possible learning experiences?
Belinda, you
Yes.
got that?
Yes,
Thanks.
yes, thank you. Yeah, I agree with you, Natasha. I really agree with you. And I think we have a lot of excellent educators who see the opportunity and who is taking the opportunity to improve, um, the learning experience for the students in classes. And I agree with you. If we don't take that opportunity, we are really robbing our students of learning experiences, and we really don't have an excuse to stick to old practices. And I'm not saying we should throw it out, but I'm saying we should update it, like keep using it, but update it to serve our students better. And like you also said, Rita, is that we do need the students to do independent study, and that can be outside of the classroom. It doesn't have to just be in the classroom. So time allocated in our schools currently is just the time in the classroom, and that is what we need to be compliant to. But it can be study at home, it can be homework. I'm not saying that we need to throw out homework at all, but that should then be part of that 27 or 30 hours that we allocate to that. To make it more active. But yeah, it's a whole debate and whole discussion that we can have about that. But yeah.
And it's interesting in your response, Belinda, how equity comes into play with, given the last conversation around meeting the students where they at and the diversity of where they could be.
Yes.
And how time doesn't play a fair game towards that equity principles we want to enact.
I agree.
But
I
yeah,
agree with you.
any other comment?
Correct.
Sorry, Belinda, go ahead.
No. I just wanted to emphasize this is exactly what this is about. It's a starting point to discuss with equity as the underlying issue, because how do we meet our students where they are? If they can't come to class, how do we meet them? It's not the only thing that counts for them to be in class and tick them off to be there. There's different ways that we can do this. And I mean, yeah, that's our discussion for today.
So we have another question. Please go. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just want to start with how I started my session on Tuesday. I quoted John Dewey, who says, "Give the pupils something to do, not something to learn. And the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking. Learning naturally results." I'm going to this a notion of experiential learning and this social interaction that takes place. And also Ken Robinson talks about creativity, which creates learning, or where again learning takes place. And I go back to physical education. Whenever I teach physical education with the first years by Education Campus, we always have this thing of hidden curricula that takes place. And part of my argument is, or rather worry or concern actually, it's time. And physical education, it's always given a short time. And I'm like, that's where the active learning takes place, this embodied learning. So it's not a question, I was just commenting. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. I love your quotes. I love your quote. Don't give them something to learn, but something to do. And that is exactly, that's your first domain for engagement, doing. So that is exactly linking to this. And thank you for your comment. That's perfect.
Any other comments, questions, chat space? Thanks, Arshad.
So there's a few comments in the Padlet. Tanya says, as a postgraduate research education person, I'm also thinking about how this conceptual framework can be applied across all NQF level descriptors up to the level of doctoral learning and teaching.
Nice.
And
Thank you
then,
for that comment, Tanya.
and then Elizabeth says, being aware of a failure of time calls for revising how we teach and how students learn. Your framework is a viable lens to look into this.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Much appreciated.
Are we good? Any more thoughts? Belinda, again, I think another valuable conversation to be broadened and taken forward within our institution as well. Um, uh, and of course, your work with the schools systems as well. So thank you so much for that. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you, everyone, for staying, and much appreciated.
I'm going to hand over to Herod or Fatima. Thanks.